Hi everyone. I'm here today with astrologer and psychosynthesis psychotherapist Mark Jones. Mark, welcome.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
And well, the frame today is really about how astrology can be used in a therapeutic context. I was inspired to reach out to you because of your book, The Soul Speaks, the therapeutic potential of astrology. And I think we could talk a little bit about that and also how it could also be in reverse as well, because we're in new times now where astrology is, I think, starting to enter the zeitgeist more. And
Yes,
you could be almost have another subtitle for what we're discussing, which is the astrological potential within therapy.
yes.
So that's what I want to explore. But I thought, and we were talking about this off camera, but the thing that might be most interesting for our viewers who perhaps wouldn't know this is the story you have of how you came across the fact that Roberto Assagioli, the founder of Psychosynthesis, for those who don't know, was actually a practitioner of astrology.
Yeah, which is quite revelatory, isn't it? I mean, this point about the therapeutic potential of astrology, it's enormously cutting edge. In the era of transiting Uranus going into Gemini, trining Pluto and Aquarius, where we're looking at all this innovation and tech and stuff, this is a clear therapeutic innovation potential. At its best, it's like therapy with a map. And, the shadow of therapy, as I'm sure you're experienced enough to have realized, Jamie, is it can go on for a long time and
Mm.
have long periods where it seems to not get anywhere,
Mm.
which some of which may be quite necessary coming up against profound resistance, and some of which just never really get anywhere or the person wasn't ready. So, seeing, for example, windows of opportunities through transits or progressions, or seeing the natal structures and realizing the fault lines along which a person might crack and/or open up on a deeper level, is surely, you know, it's much better. The founder, Jung's typology, the four types: sensation, intuition, feeling, thinking, that lead to the Myers Briggs, is nowhere near as subtle as astrology, as Jung himself realized when he studied astrology for many years. So here's this enormous tool. We're underplaying it, we're underutilizing it. Why? I suspect all sorts of prejudicial reasons. I myself, even as a practitioner, was tempted to say, astrology's on the rise, you were saying effectively. And I was thinking, yeah, if you destroy people's security fundamentally enough in the world and generate enough
Mm.
anxiety,
Yeah.
they'll turn to any old weird new. And,
Yeah. As soon as
yeah,
I said it, I was thinking the same thing. There is also a
yes,
reason for it. Yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
yeah. And part of the reason is, you know, we could observe the loss of transcendent values within the culture, the shifting from a predominantly Christian culture to a sort of what late capitalist, technocratic, consumerist society without those fundamental values. And Christianity had its flaws, but the Sermon on the Mount is a high moral vision. So we're living in an era without the high moral vision, and an increasingly sort of soulless transhumanist tech movement. So you don't know what your place is. And astrology is the study of your place in the cosmos. I mean, I think a lot of people study astrology because they want that sense of participatory meaning, and they might go to an astrology school to learn to become an astrologer. But in fact, as we know from therapy trainings, lots of people are doing therapy trainings for personal development reasons. And then, of course, when it comes to getting trainee clients and having to organize a supervisor, they often pull out, halfway through the course or whatever. They've got the part that they needed. They don't want to actually do the work with people. And I think that's legitimate. I'm not having a go at that. I'm not saying that somehow, I'm not being supercilious about it. I think that's what people are looking for, some sort of process where they can engage with something that excites them passionately, where they have a sense of meaning. And that's the great deficit. And that's the great rise of anxiety and depression and the addict mind. Click, click, click hypnotically in our time, right? So I think a meaning orientated view of therapy, spiritually orientated view of therapy, plus astrology is a winning combination, right? It's genuinely powerful. And of course, you discover that this is not new. I mean, it would be new if people started applying it or having dialogues or conferences where people discussed the crossover, which does not happen. Let's just be frank.
No, that amazes me.
It does amaze me too. It's clearly a sign of prejudicial
Hmm.
issues on both sides, frankly.
Hmm.
But Roberto Assagioli. So I'm there with my colleague. My colleague's presenting a talk in Rome for Psychosynthesis, the international organization. This is 2012. I'm away in America teaching, and he managed to wangle me in. Right, he writes to them, my colleague, esteemed international traveler. He tells this little story of how I'm off doing. I couldn't be there, and manages to get me in the archive with him. So shout out to Keith Hackwood for doing this, right? So I go into the archive with him that day, not knowing what to expect. We're in Florence. We're just like, oh my gosh, this is his house. This is Assagioli's house. Cool. Let's take a few pictures outside Assagioli's house. Lovely big sort of palatial thing on the hill down towards the older part of Florence, the center. And then we go in, there's a group showing us around. They're clearly all very precious about it. They don't seem to know at that point, it's very early days, right? How much they're letting people in. They've just opened this thing up and they're not quite sure. But anyway, it's crowded. It's a popular event. All these people are milled in his study. And the lady, Paola, who's organizing it, turns to me and my friend and colleague and says, well, you guys might like this room. And there's a second room. And we open the door and it's stacked floor to wall with boxes saying spiritual astrology in English.
So the understatement of the year, then you might like this
Yes,
one.
exactly. The only person there that might even understand the implications of it.
Hmm.
A person who had spent years earlier, a decade earlier, at the end of his therapy training, in 2001, something like that, to saying to my teachers, defending astrology, because they were saying things like, telling people what to do is not the same as self-discovery. I think a brilliant point, by the way, and one that astrologers need to really think about, because that's clearly a therapeutic truth. I mean, just witnessed in my case by trying to tell my 7-year-old things versus some greater form of engagement about how we might collaborate. So this is a stunning moment. I mean, we spend half an hour in there. I realize the extent of it. I see hundreds of hand-drawn charts, which I've never done. We live in the age of computers, but they take hours.
The
They take
discipline.
hours.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he's got like Rudhyar's chart. He's got like, Indian teachers, great artists. He has Freud's. He has spent hours with each figure, hand creating their chart. So I realized the seriousness of it, the earnestness. He must have been doing this very intensely for many years, just from the scale of the material. And I sit on the cold sort of stone steps inside his house with my friend, and I'm just like, man, we have got to do something with this, because this is mind-blowing. And this is, so you had on the Jungian front, you had Maggie Hyde's work in the 80s exposing Jung's interest in astrology. But then, we've had Liz Green add to that recently and various other sources showing that Jung took it very seriously indeed. Then we discover that Assagioli, a man who was in the Burkoltzi at the same time as Jung, who was in correspondence with Freud and Jung. So these two early figures that studied with Freud to some extent personally, Assagioli not as much as Jung, but Assagioli helped Freud communicate with his biographer Ernst Jones during the war, and because he was in Italy and passed between the two warring sides of Austria and London. So these two figures that study with Freud are right at the inception of the psychoanalytical impulse, you could say a crucial impulse of the 20th century in a larger scale for the culture. And yet they turn it more soulful. They turn it more meaning orientated. They turn it more in a more transpersonal direction. Well, and they're using astrology, literally using astrology to map that transpersonal vision path. So they're using the ancient kind of sense of there is a time for everything, a season for everything. You grow through these cycles in astrology. They're using astrology literally to map the soul potential of more humanistic or transpersonal psychology. And of course, that continues in the 70s and 80s with Stanislav Grof and Richard Tarnas at Esalen.
They worked together, of course, didn't they? On
Yes,
the BPM
yes,
matrices, yeah, and
yes,
putting planets onto them, yeah,
yes,
yeah, the outer planets mainly in Saturn.
yes,
It's so interesting. Thank you for just sharing it because I know I've said it with fellow students and teachers. I shared the fact that Assagioli used astrology,
yes.
and there was kind of I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a bit of like cognitive dissonance. It's almost like yes, but it was almost like it couldn't be absorbed.
I know.
It was like a superficial level of yes, but then but was he really?
Yeah.
Was he really
No.
though? I mean, was he just sort of just dabbling? And
Yeah.
what you're saying is actually no, absolutely not. If you go to the trouble of learning to construct a chart before computers with the ephemeris, which is a real pain,
Yes.
you're committed and you've got quite a damn good knowledge of transits and where planets are in the sky any time and the importance of this.
I mean, it makes me think of some kind of like modern take on a movie like Footloose or something. Like they're squares, aren't they? Frankly, I mean,
Mm.
you tell them that Assagioli and Jung were into astrology. It's a bass drop moment, isn't it? The
Yeah.
kids are going wild on the dance floor, kind of thing.
Mm.
Everybody's going yeah, yeah, and holding up their little shiny light things, right? And the staid world of psychotherapy is going, I'm not so sure about that. I
Mm.
do. They can't handle the bass drop. They can't handle the
No.
boom, the kind of the bit that all the kids are waiting for, in a sense, in my fantasy version of it in my mind. But my point being, there is something deeply resistant here, isn't there? There is something old-fashioned. There is something prejudicial. Like some sort of middle-class conservatives in the American South saying there should be no dancing in this school. No one should be free to study. I mean, it's not just astrology with Assagioli, it's theosophy. And it's not
Mhm.
just astrology with Jung. He's having direct psychic encounters with strange archetypal beings,
I know
including, yeah,
that's still treated very often as if he was having a sort of a mad
I
episode.
know, I
It's
know.
like, no, that's actually central to his experience and what he's trying to
Yes.
convey to you about the nature of reality. No, he was just having an episode at that
He was
time.
having a wobble. He's having a bit of a funny turn. Oh,
Yeah,
he channeled
yeah,
an entire book by spirits of the dead, and it makes some kind of coherent sense. And that was just one episode.
yeah.
Um, so just as that potentially is reductionistic about the creative genius of Carl Gustav Jung, and I think we have to use that kind of phrase. I think the man was inspired. I mean, I think he was damaged at points. I think it was a struggle. I mean, whose life isn't? I mean, sorry, who's going to stand up here and say human life is easy? But he was a stunning creative powerhouse and visionary. And, what we realize is these powerhouses and these visionaries that were trying to imagine a sort of spiritually inclusive, holistic vision of psychology were turning to astrology for the ancient sense of comfort and validation that they were part of, sort of meaningful cycles of history and the evolution of not just humanity, but the cosmos itself, as it were. And I think you cut them off from that, you lose something enormously precious. And
Mm.
then, in a hugely pragmatic sense, I mean, the average psychotherapist that was at all open minded, if we could create a class for 2 days, a weekend class, and I could show them what basic understanding of transits, if you understood what the archetype involved was, how you could see windows of opportunity or challenge for your clients, would have their minds blown by how incredibly useful and pertinent that might be, given that the art of human transformation is so darn tricky, frankly.
Mm. No, I totally agree with you. I think part of the struggle with it is that astrology is hard work. I mean, it's going to be made easier for people to understand with chat and AI
Mm.
coming. There's no doubt about it. But it takes a lot of work. There's a certain amount of energy that has to be put in before
Yes,
you can sort of grasp it. And I think because of that energy cliff you have to get up,
yes.
it's much easier to just to go no and to go back to
But
what
there's a
how
deeper
this
embedded
is.
prejudice too, isn't there? You have to decide, and this is where I liked James Hillman's Suicide in the Soul so much, because it exposed the sort of hidden medical white coat behind so much psychotherapy or psychology and definitely psychiatry. And remember, Freud, Assagioli, Carl Jung, they were all doctors. They were all psychiatrists, which is this fantasy that somehow, psychotherapy is akin to science, and people like to quote neuroscientists or mindfulness people and your dopamine regulation and your different neurotransmitters to give the kind of coy illusion that we're all in a serious, intelligent, rational club here, aren't we? In this late capitalist society, at this point in the turning of the history of the world, we've all decided that, intellect and rationality are the way. And, frankly, religion answered the profound other need in the soul, didn't they? That Jung called the religious function of the psyche, which became an excellent book by Lionel Corbett, a teacher at Pacifica who passed away, sadly, last year, a fellow Manchester boy like me, doing well in America and teaching loads of people to become
I think I saw him lecturing
therapists.
actually in a
Yeah,
Jung
yeah,
course 2 years ago.
yeah. Lovely guy. I had dinner with
Mm.
him in just near Pacifica one time
Mhm.
when I was in the States, and fabulous company, very, very funny. But the religious function of the psyche, I would argue, is real. The need to have some sort of integrative sense of meaning, and the scientific rationalist reductionism does not give you that. It will not give you that, to say that consciousness is an epiphenomena of the brain soup. It will not give you that to say all evolution is an accidental consequence of just running the same old survival game over and over. And in fact, many, many sensible people now question these things, frankly, purely intellectually, never mind on a faith based level.
Mm. Yeah.
So, what we're doing, we're telling people that, you know, as they face their existential fragility in an increasingly complex and uncertain world, that there is no greater power, there is no greater integrative force. It's all just a bit accidental, but make the best of it. Try and do well at school, get a decent job, son, chin up. I mean, really, what what are you supposed to do with that in the face of reality?
Mm. It's so true. I also just want to briefly bring in as well or get you to talk just about the context in which Assagioli was sort of getting to grips with astrology as well, because this was like the time of Dane Rudhyar, wasn't it? Who was
Yes.
a big figure in the astrological scene because he was changing the way that astrology was, how I said, it's being understood and also presenting itself. It was a real a sort of humanistic shift there. Don't know if you want to
Oh
just
yeah,
say a little.
Rogers phenomenally important, right? And it's clear he meets Assagioli. So Assagioli, to say he has a sort of important and indeed devastating 1930s is perhaps a bit of an understatement. So obviously, you've got the rise of National Socialism of Germany in Germany, and you've got the increasing shift of Italy towards the right, and then eventually the ascension of Mussolini. Now, Rudhyar visits Assagioli probably in 1936 after he's finished Astrology of Personality, his major groundbreaking work that has this huge impact on modern astrology. And he's off to India, I think, to visit his wife. And he stops in Florence along the way. And they clearly study together, right? And they have a common bond in theosophy, which is a separate conversation in a sense. I think they're studying charts of teachers together. But I mean, Rudhyar goes on to develop his own visionary sense of astrology, whereas I think Assagioli is frankly more trapped in staying with Bailey and theosophy's vision of what the meaning is. So Rudhyar becomes a greater astrologer. I don't think it's Assagioli's great strength or anything, but clearly, 1936, he dies in 1974 in his 80s. The mid 1930s is fairly early on. He is serious throughout his life. And then we were shown something, my friend and colleague Keith, he was staff. By the time we went a couple of years ago to the archive, which was our third visit, he was effectively presenting a sort of day workshop whilst we were there. And so he was staff temporarily, which at these kinds of bureaucratic lines means an awful lot to the Italians at that archive, right? So he is taken upstairs. So just to give some context for this, in 2012, when we're in the archive, I pipe up, what's in the drawer of this desk in his study? The enormous locked drawer. Oh, nothing. I pressed them. We've never opened it. I'm like, but he died in 1974. Right? So that whole conversation occurs in 2012, and I start ruminating, thinking this cannot be the case. We're clearly not quite being shown everything, right, for whatever reason. But it's so funny I should have been asking for that, because 2 years ago, when Keith's staff, he's taken up to the final staircase, the attic room where all the archive material was stored to begin with. But then there was a leak in the roof years ago, and they moved it downstairs, and a Canadian or American novelist staying there discovered it. And this is why the archive now exists. I mean, it was just stored away after his death. And then a leak in the roof. I mean, it's like some weird symbolism of, the house of the self. He's led upstairs to this final room, literally the staircase. It's like some expressionist film or something. It goes up there. And he's shown this journal, this green journal on a desk. And it turns out that what was in the locked drawer was an astrology reading that Alan Leo, the famous theosophical astrologer, did for Roberto Assagioli in his 20s.
Oh, wow.
In a long format, written journal form. And Assagioli kept it in the locked drawer of his desk. And every 6 months or every year, when he felt like it, when he felt the need, he would just go through it again and ruminate on his soul potential as revealed in the journal. Now, I mean, no one's listening to us. Obviously, this is an entirely confidential conversation. My friend and colleague Keith snuck me up into that room to take a quick look at it, even though I wasn't staff. But no one need know that. I think we can keep a lid on that. So we know now that perhaps even prior to Assagioli studying astrology, even when he's more in his 20s and he's more in the scene in Florence, where he's doing an arts magazine and stuff, and he's involved with local like modernist artists and stuff like that, he's reading in his private time this reading by one of the great theosophical astrologers of the age.
It's so fascinating, isn't it? I didn't realize the connection with Alan Leo. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Alan Leo, a man tragically, criminally prosecuted for superstitious fortune telling,
Yes,
that contributes to his early death, even though Alan Leo is trying to make a breakthrough to what we might call the more modern stance of not just offering predictive material.
Yeah. And indeed, that's very much that. So that's so interesting, because that's the kind of the context in which Assagioli's stepping into this now, but into astrology in the sort of early part of the 20th century. Because with Alan Leo and Dane Rudhyar, it's becoming more person-centered anyway as an astrology, isn't it? It's becoming more about looking at cycles rather than what it had always been seen as for a long, long time, which is a sort of very medieval, fatalistic sort of view of astrology.
Yes,
it was getting a real rebrand, and there's Assagioli in the right place at the right time.
Well, and Rudhyar, of course, you see, he is quite explicitly just simply reading cutting edge psychology. So by the time he publishes Astrology of Personality, he claims to have, and I believe him, read everything Jung has written up to that point. And for example, if you follow some of Rudhyar's famous book titles, there is, of course, Person-Centered Astrology. And then there is a late pamphlet called From Humanistic to Transpersonal Astrology. Mm-hmm. So clearly he is just following. So with Person-Centered, he's following Rogers. With Humanistic, he's following Maslow and the like. And with Transpersonal, he's leading it because as a sort of scholar of Rudhyar in California, made clear to me in a long personal conversation in which I was precariously balanced on a flotation device in a pool, nursing a gin and tonic, feeling very uncomfortable. I don't think I'd ever actually been on a flotation device in a pool prior to that in my life, as he lectured me on Rudhyar for 3 hours in a genuinely mind-blowing way, where I was like hard to stay with because of the setting. Very Californian scene. And he made it clear that Sri Aurobindo, people like that, were a massive influence on Rudhyar in the final years. And even Smut's book on holism and stuff like that, integrated organizing, holistic models. And
Ken Wilber's picked that up. So
yes, well, exactly. And run with it. One could say almost too frenetically, too far, but it was still a brilliant move, at least to begin with. So Rudhyar is literally tracking psychology's evolution and then bringing those messages back to astrology and how they might be seen. And actually, for anyone who's interested in Dane Rudhyar, there is a website called chaldea.com, Khaldea.com, I believe, if I'm spelling it correctly. And you can see a lot of this material. It's archived there, things like person-centered astrology. But I mean, the brilliant pamphlet, of which they at least have most of on there, called From Humanistic to Transpersonal Astrology. I agree with that pamphlet so profoundly that when I first read it in a small old copy I'd sourced for quite a lot of money, I was honestly stunned. There were paragraphs where I thought I could have actually written that myself. I mean, not just that he was close to my thinking, and Rudhyar's quite a different kind of person to me, fundamentally. I mean, he's a mad Aries with this mind, and I'm, at the end of the day, a Pisces who's quite soft. But it's very, very clear, and he points towards stuff. I mean, lacerating opening line. Astrology, has this real tendency, I'm paraphrasing terribly, to cover up, unsubstantiated personal opinion disguised as fact. Because if you really probe into the worst excesses of the astrology community, there are incredibly small data sets. People are developing new theories based on a handful of readings they did and maybe 20 or 30 or 40 historical charts. It just, the fringe nature of the profession means that lots of its steps wouldn't stand up. I mean, just like psychology's academic pretensions sees them not think the red book stacks up or whatever.
Because we're kind of getting now onto The Soul Speaks itself, the book you wrote, which was exactly, well, it was addressing this and other, well, the issues basically where astrology wasn't, in your view at that time, I presume still, not integrating the insights from therapy.
Yes. Yeah, you've had this whole century. You've not just had Psychology 101, have you? You've had 201, 301, 401, 501, all these different movements, all these different experience, all these books on transference, countertransference, projection, dynamics in a room, what's going on in the space. And astrologers, basically what it comes down to is, just like therapy, someone comes into your room and sits in your study or your conference hotel room seating area or your Zoom meeting and asks you for help and asks you questions about their life and what the potential outcomes might be. It is very similar in some fundamental act, isn't it? The incumbent comes to you, "Oh, Jamie, I read your paper on such and such. You seem to have such a great perspective. Jamie, I'm going through this, Whether it's therapy or looking at your chart, they're giving you the same precious part of themselves, aren't they? And saying, please take care of this fluttering little bird of hope and aspiration that feels very fragile right now, And I think therapists one hopes that therapists have a training around that to some extent. I don't think astrologers do very often at all. I don't think that they even consider that to be part of their remit. So one important point I make in that book is it is a de facto counseling, coaching setting.
It absolutely
you can't
is.
Escape it. You can't. And intellectual pretension. And I've argued since that we should have different categories within astrology. Like the people that want to translate ancient texts, great. So research astrology is different, and then they wouldn't need counseling, coaching skills. You've got to open up that dialogue for people who want to do consultations, the people who are drawn to doing readings. It's in the reading dynamic that the kind of therapy 101 stuff needs to be explored.
I mean, you're effectively saying the prediction, well, there's a predictive element to astrology, and we can talk about that in a sec, but while that's in it, fundamentally, what's actually happening is it's two people in a room. It's always a dynamic.
It's always the modern human in search of a soul, isn't it? To paraphrase Jung, and two people together and whatever might emerge from that being together.
That's not the prism necessarily that an astrologer is trained to see it as. They feel that they have to deliver some pronouncement because they're scanning a chart, and therefore, particularly if there's a predictive element to it, but also if there's the psychological element to it, they feel that they've got to deliver, but it can also lean in towards power dynamic as well. Like the astrologer can start to believe their own hype, and then they're making pronouncements, and then the client gives up their power. This is a huge thing in therapy. Astrology, not really talked about.
Exactly. And many astrologers face that issue, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so profound, the point you make about power, that it's taken me out of what I was going to say, which I hope we can come back to. But you add to what's already there transferentially, like I make the point in The Soul Speaks about Cohert's vision of mirror transference or idealizing transference. So in idealizing transference, the child needs the parent to be larger than life or heroic or to be aspirational towards in some way. Well, my dad, he's so strong. He can lift huge tree trunks. And then it turns out your dad is not some, legendarily fit boxer or wrestler. It's just that you were 6 and your perfectly ordinary father seemed incredibly strong to you. Cohort picks this up as incredibly important. And then mirror transference is the kind of special feeling a child gets because they're the son or daughter of so-and-so, because of the mirror, because of, who I am being mirrored. Well, lots of this energy goes into the therapy space, goes into astrology consultations too. And if you have this idea that, all your job is to intellectually dispense your pearls of wisdom garnered from your decades of study of the ancient wisdom, I mean, you're already prone to being suckered, aren't you, to that point, even before they start hitting you with all that transferential energy. And as I'm sure you know, transferential energy is pretty intoxicating. I mean, think how bands feel. I was just watching that documentary on Paul McCartney on Amazon Prime, Man on the Run. Excellent documentary on Macca. Talking about him going back out on the road again with Wings when they did a world tour, the feeling you get in front of when people really love your music and just shine tens of thousands of people, shine that love back at you. I mean, wow.
Mind-blowing. Must be
It is.
mind-blowing.
It must be mind-blowing. Even one person doing that for you in a space can be impressive, especially if you have unresolved deficient needs that you haven't explored. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. And then was there another point I cut you off that you wanted to
No,
add?
I think I brought it back in really, which is this, but I mean, I can underline it, which is because you were saying astrologers don't seem to feel that it's a need or it's part of their remit. And I would agree with you. I think they literally think it's an afterthought. Like on a therapy training, you might have something about professional ethics thrown in at the end, or I don't mean like therapeutic ethics. I just mean like how you're supposed to keep your notes or something, or what legal stance you're supposed to have, or what level of insurance you're supposed to have. I think lots of astrologers sort of saw it like that. Like it was a thing that some people were concerned about, bit of counseling stuff at the end.
Yeah, tick a box. Yeah.
Yeah. Or how to sandwich bad news. You've got a terrible transit, but there's some kind of theory. I'll say something nice about them, the terrible news, and then say something nice again, as if the fact that you've got Jupiter coming to your Venus and you might be going to some great parties makes up for the terrible story of trauma you just told in the middle. Yeah. It's absolutely mad when you think about it. I mean, therapists would have had a nightmare with so much astrology. And of course, this is part of the reason. Why is this important to explore? Have I just got it in for my 2 professions? No. Because part of the prejudicial reason why psychotherapy, at least, won't listen to astrology is linked to these issues.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I'm also thinking now, because we talked then about The Soul Speaks, about what the purpose of that was, which was very much you were speaking to astrologers first, like, hey guys, sort your house out.
Yes.
But I was also interested now in us speaking to, well, therapists, but anybody really who's watching, but particularly therapists. They'd find this interesting, I think, is how they would understand the importance of astrology. We've sort of touched on it in various ways, but I just thought it'd be interesting to maybe go over just from the ground up a couple of things. Like there's predictive, and then there's sort of like a psychological basis to a natal chart, and how you would maybe not use one or use the other. It would just be interesting to start with that, maybe.
Well, there's 2 things there. There's 2 questions, aren't there? What are the models of astrology? A massive subject in itself, by the way. And then how could astrology, in simplest terms, be explained for therapeutic use, the use of the archetypes. I mean, which one shall I go with first? Let's go for the therapeutic use to at least just say something, just in case we don't go there fully again, which is, all these planets in the astrological chart, they symbolize archetypally different aspects of the person. We have to acknowledge, I think, and this was a key insight in psychosynthesis and what was called subpersonalities, that, the, the coherent self that most people feel they have is basically an illusion, in the sense that you're the same person when your boss is dressing you down as when you wait outside your lover's door, as opposed to when your kid's sick. Most people are fluctuating profoundly between different states, bouncing around with different unresolved parts of their being. And frankly, astrology is one of the great subtle arts of having all this archetypal material that symbolizes those different states of being.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's a complex symbolism because Saturn might stand for, say, the persecutory anxiety of the superego, feeling restricted by internalized negative thought. And Saturn might also stand for genuine loss. And Saturn might also stand for actual, real maturation.
Mm.
That's how complex it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complex, multivalent symbolism. And then to link that symbolism back to the predictive and ongoing question, I mean, Richard Tarnas's quote that, astrology is not concretely predictive, it is archetypally predictive, is a great quote. Astrology will show you when certain archetypes are in town and when you have, therefore, certain opportunities to potentially go off the rails with that archetype or have some profound learning experience with it. It is not concretely predictive. Now, there are predictive astrologers out there, I'll tell you, it often is. I don't rule that out. It's just I'm not interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
No one in all of human history has predicted the future particularly well. And with all the AI and incredible computing power, the non-linear dynamics of reality make predicting the weather in the UK at the end of the week challenging, even with all the modern computational power. So how are we going to predict reality, which is infinitely more subtle and complex than even the British weather? So why play that game? I think astrology has a predictive element. It's certainly divinatory because it is basically saying at its central symbolism that the complex symbolic picture of the sky, fictionally transcribed to these little glyphs, as it were, is symbolic of your life potential. So right at the core of the astrological idea is this act of correspondence, as Neoplatonic thought might have thought of it, or the French symbolist poets, seeing a correspondence between, the flower of a rose and spiraling galaxies or something. It's a very poetic idea, isn't it? That somehow the micro and the macrocosm, as above, so below. And so astrology has at its core this philosophical, psycho-spiritual leap of faith that somehow the picture of things the day you came in, it's like some Shakespearean idea, isn't it? The night the kings died in Macbeth, the dogs were barking wildly, such and such were, all the portents kind of stuff, right? So we've gone from a world where there was excessive superstitious portents for most people's tastes today to a world where there are none. And what you find is, whether you believe that there is a divine greater power, which I do, but even if you don't, what you find psychologically, if you're honest with yourself, is that people are like fish out of water if you remove all of that level from their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that we kid ourselves that we can be purely rational, but it doesn't.
Yes.
It doesn't hold. I should just say at this point for our viewers as well, just to, I'm sure most people know this, but just to make it clear, like a birth chart is basically like a timestamp. It's where the birth chart is just basically where the planets are when we're born. So there's a whole series of like archetypal patterns just where they are at the time of birth. Like a Saturn is in Aries, that means something at the time of birth. But then also what we're talking about here as well is when the planets continue to move around as they do continuously in the sky, there's a second way of capturing that as well. And it's the interaction between these transits and our static planets when we're born, that where we're getting this sort of archetypal reading that you're talking about from.
Exactly. And we're saying, aren't
Yeah.
we? Why would it matter? Because, by the way, that it's not even literally the planets. In tropical astrology, which Western astrology is, I mean, you're off by a considerable margin. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a symbolic
Symbolic. Yeah.
picture
Yeah.
of the planets at the moment where you were born, centered around, various key axial points, the ecliptic and other key points to do with the way the Earth situates in the kind of solar system and the cosmic plane. And then the planets themselves, from the Greek word meaning wanderer, symbolize moving qualities or potentialities within people. But it's all a symbolic construct, right? It's an art. Astrology is not some, should it be added to the STEM subjects kind of thing, right? This is not, some astrologers treat astrology like it's civil engineering or something, like we're calculating the load bearing weight of a bridge. Otherwise, thousands of consumers will die, commuters will die. No, I mean, it's really not.
It's a craft, isn't it, really?
And an art and a
And an
kind
art,
of
yeah.
vision symbol system more akin to the Bayeux tapestry than the actual war
Mm,
that occurred in 1066.
mm,
It's much more a symbolic map. And so, but that's why it's so useful, because in the era where we have destroyed much of what we used to call higher meaning, both in art, in religion, the great artists of the past, without sounding like a complete fuddy-duddy here, but there was an awful lot of like sacred dedication and becoming a master of a particular thing. Or you think of 3 generations of the same family working as stonemasons on a cathedral or something.
staggering, isn't it, to our
Yeah,
mind?
exactly. Compared to modern day, whatever. Yeah, I won't lay into anything in particular, but clearly we have a much more careless and superficial mirror held up to the contemporary culture view of art today. There's just been a
Yeah.
genuine general decline, you could argue, in the kind of vision of higher power. And when you realize that people are both consciously and unconsciously suffering from that loss, you realize partly the power of astrology and why it's so significantly on the rise.
And with you, I know from reading your books a bit about how you bring astrology into your
Yes,
therapeutic practice. In fact, it's not even it's a astrotherapeutic practice
exactly.
almost. Yeah.
It's a complete crossover at this point, and
Complete
I have
crossover.
actually transitioned from the world of conventional therapy. I mean, and licensing in the UK. I mean, 95% of my clients are not in the UK, so mainly North America, but also internationally. Um, I'm in a genuine crossover space at this point. I'm working with people. I'm more like a therapeutic ally, I call myself, or a mentor who is helping people who are interested in astrology and their chart to grow and bringing genuine psychotherapeutic insight.
And I'm wondering in that space whether you talk a little bit about, I suppose, individuation, because the potential for astrology with that, because obviously astrology can help with someone who's going through a crisis. We can perhaps address that separately in a second. Like that, you can look at what's going on with Saturn or something. But individuation is obviously it's when you're at a different level in terms of you as a client, you've come to the astrologer or therapist for assistance, where you're going through a more sustained process.
Yes.
Um, how can astrology help with that?
Well, signatures that help you understand that it's actually happening.
Mhm.
Remember, in my best sessions, astrology is what, 15 to 25% of it, 15 to 20% of it, maybe less.
Right.
It is, and this is the advantage of me being a therapist separately for so many years, is that I understand what astrology can and can't do, what you don't need it for, in effect. But it is helpful for determining bigger life signatures, outer planets to personal planets, Pluto to someone's sun, how often that corresponds to a deeper transformational crisis about something more deeply shifting in their essence or some deeper part of their individuation, freeing themselves from others' expectations or things that have held them down.
Mm. Pluto being an
Um,
archetype, I should just say for the viewer
yes,
again, just of extraordinary, complete and intense, but thorough. transformation.
Yes.
Pluto's the ultimate transforming planet, really, in the
Yes, or dwarf planet, as it's now
dwarf planet.
technically been
Yeah.
demoted. Although, if you go to where it was discovered in Flagstaff, there's a little box saying, vote, should it be a planet or a dwarf planet? And the planet box is completely full.
Yeah, I
But
agree with that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, once you know a bit about astrology, how it might be therapeutically applied becomes obvious in certain ways if you're already a therapist. The problem that therapists have is they often don't know that much about astrology, although
Mm,
you'd be surprised how many there are. And
mm.
I have clients and students who are therapists who are just, really quite skillful with astrology, but feel it's hard to share that in their profession or their licensing requirements or other things. And then just when you know a little bit about therapy, it's quite easy to think how therapeutic insight could help astrologers, but not that many astrologers know that much about therapy, even from the point of view of maybe done it sincerely as a client for years, never mind studied it on a more fundamental level. So there's such a sort of low hanging fruit here, Jamie. I mean, it's just so easy to imagine how these two worlds might intersect and help each other if there
Mm.
was sincere engagement rather
Yeah,
than prejudicial encounters.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. The potential is huge. That's why I remain staggered that it's not being explored
I
so
know.
much. I wonder whether I could. I've got so many. I'm conscious of time, but I've got so many questions. But just maybe we could just focus in on one planet, just like Saturn. And you've talked about it already. That what that as an
Yes.
archetype can mean. It can be repression. It can be structure. It can be responsibility. As you said, I think you used a great phrase, multivalent
Symbolism. Yeah.
symbolism. So like all the planets can be multivalent,
Well,
and
and look, the symbol of Saturn, right, is a cross onto the moon. It is literally the burden of time on the moon. It is the
mm,
crucifixion. It is, we are born to die. That's the ultimate Saturn.
hmm
Archetypal Saturn is you're born, you feel incredibly sensitive, you're really getting into life, and then all sorts of shit things happen to you. Then you have to grow up. Then you have to probably work hard at something you feel ambivalent about a chunk of the time, and then grow old. And just as you're getting into it and starting to feel a bit personally empowered, you notice bits are starting to, break down
no,
and fall off.
that's a
Yeah.
good summary. That's how it is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Saturn, right? Now, my argument is once you understand that, you have to realize this archetypal Saturn. So if your problem is you can't handle the fact that people grow old and die, you've got a different problem, right? It's not going to be astrologically answered per se. You have to engage with something existentially because growing old and having a fairly good life with quite a lot of suffering in it and then dying is in many ways the best case scenario for most people, right? That's a victory, right? So that's archetypal Saturn, right? We're born into this limited conditional setup. Then personal Saturn, you could track the Saturn cycle, as I allude to in The Soul Speaks, and
Mm.
have explored in masterclasses.
We should say that's every 7 years
Every 7 years
is
it squares
squares
itself.
and
Yeah.
squares and squares. So after a 28, 29 year sort of cycle, it's done a complete
Yes.
return back to
Yes.
itself. And that's
Which
significant.
A shows you where real maturation starts to occur at the Saturn return. The idea that just because you're legally allowed to have sex or drink or vote, you're somehow mature is clearly perhaps optimistic. Let's be diplomatic. Psychological maturation does not occur with the same certainty as biological maturation. You could argue, and the work of object relations and people like Margaret Marler would argue that basically psychological maturation is a psychic victory. You have to achieve it. It's not a given. As we can witness, there are plenty of people in old people's homes who are actually the psychological or emotional age of small children. That's clearly the case.
Mm.
So psychological age and biological age are related but separate. And you could say the Saturn cycle symbolizes the potential of that psychological aging to accompany the biological process. And then, of course, so that's archetypal, that every 7 years it squares itself and at 28, 29 it returns. But then within that, you've got your individual chart that it's crossing. So some people might have a Saturn to Sun when they're 6 years old, and others might have it when they're 26. That's very different, right? So within the archetypal timings that are universal to humanity, we can track the individual nuances. Well, basically, that's incredibly useful, isn't it? Because we
Mm,
all know that being human gives us an archetypal similarity with each other, but we also know that very distinct things happen to us.
mm,
And those planetary cycles symbolize that nuance, that intricacy. And then, as I said, so within that, so Saturn corresponds to structure, the skeletal system, the bones, whatever, right? But it's also the way you internalize the conditioning of your culture. What your parents' messages were to you, your teachers, the society you grew up in. Was it heavily religious society? Was it totalitarian? Was it whatever, right? The conditioning environments. And then the challenges those conditioning environments propose to people. And then Uranus would be the individuation project, which is the
mm.
attempt to understand what you are, not just through your conditioning.
Uranus is at the other end, trying to free you
Yes,
from
exactly.
Saturn,
Exactly.
like the myth in many ways.
Yes. Yes.
It's so interesting because obviously, so a number of clients will you found this throughout your career. A number of clients will come to you in their 41 to 43 age range
Yes.
because they're
Yes.
having their Saturn return. The Saturn half return, where it's
Yes.
gone halfway around
Well, they're
the
having a
chart.
Saturn opposition and the
Saturn
Uranus
opposition.
opposition at the same time.
Sorry,
Yeah.
that's what I meant. A Uranus
Uranus
opposition.
opposition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Uranus opposition.
But they're often having several other things somewhere between that too. Because if you think about it at 28, Saturn return, if you have a Saturn return at 28, then at 42, you're in a Saturn opposition and the Uranus opposition. And the Uranus opposition, why did Jung, who was an incredibly sensitive to Uranus transits person, so for example, Uranus to his midheaven when he decides to become a psychiatrist, Uranus in his 11th, the house of friends, in some prominent aspects to his chart when he meets Freud,
Mm.
Uranus coming to his ascendant, having been through the 12th when he breaks with Freud and comes out and
I
creates his
noted
own
that
work
he had
on
a
his Uranus opposition. Yeah.
Uranus opposition when he split with Freud in
Yes,
1912.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, it happened.
And so he starts to say, doesn't he, you're different in the second half of life. I mean, his Uranus opposition is so significant to him. You can read all those Jungians writing books going, finding meaning in the second half of life.
Mm.
Are they aware it all comes from his
From
Uranus
Uranus.
opposition and astrology? Yeah, because that's where
No.
Jung directly took it from. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. They don't understand that you can track. I think one of the most powerful things from a client's perspective as well, though, is if they can see the movement in the chart, you can actually show them the chart, and you can
Exactly.
just give them a basic explanation of the houses where this is happening, because the houses represent areas in your life, so they can go, oh right, that tallies, this makes sense, this is what I'm going through. This has a feel of sort of like something bigger than me. Here there's a bigger narrative than me because it's being mirrored in the planets. And the other thing I think is so just wonderfully helpful is it gives you a time frame. I mean,
Exactly.
if you've got a Saturn opposition and you're going through a real tough time, you do know you've got 2.5 years basically from the start of it to the end. So you've got that time period to actually address it, face up to what the challenges are, but knowing that it will come to an end. It's not going to carry on like this. And I think that can be quite a relief for clients who are like, is
Oh,
this
it's
ever going to
incredibly
end?
validating, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
incredibly validating and empowering. Just also the anything I think that increases the meaning people have about the level of suffering in their life. I see this a great danger, and it's often through American culture, isn't it, where you're allowed to literally advertise Prozac on television. There's this kind of whole messaging, you're American, you shouldn't suffer,
Mm,
take these drugs, you know. Well, I'm sorry, I don't want people to suffer needlessly, but the idea you're going to live a human life without suffering just seems naive to me.
mm,
And what you make of that suffering is going to be a huge part of the creative agency you bring about in your life.
mm,
So trying to like sell people short on their own suffering robs them of something.
mm,
Whereas something that helps you understand it and its rhythm and is validating that you're even going through it is, I think, extraordinarily helpful and healing.
mm. If you can see it symbolically, you can process what's happening to you better. It's
Yes.
another layer of understanding. and that is therefore another layer by which you can engage with what's going on around you and make the best of it and take
Yes.
the lessons out of it. Um, I'm just conscious I've used so
Well,
much
let
of
me ask
your.
you one question.
Oh,
How did you, sir, get into all of this? How
uh,
come you're so informed in these strange territories?
because I was going through suffering. You know, I'd gone through a divorce. I was leaving my wife,
Yes.
and I went to see our mutual friend Demian,
Okay. Yes.
and it was the first time, and I was just staggered by what he knew, and it was a combination of psychological insights and a bit of prediction. Like he knew I was going to get a new. I'd also lost my job, and I was looking for a new job, and then he told me I was going to get it that month, and I did. Actually just got it a day before I'd seen him, and I just thought there is something in this that is so powerful. And he explained to me very light touch. He just explained to me how there was such a difference between me and my ex-wife that
Hmm.
if there hadn't been this break now, it would have happened at another stage.
Well, you just had years of imprisoned suffering, suffering the mismatch. Yes, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the where the light bulb really came on. And I thought, oh my
How
God,
old were you? How old were you when this happened, approximately?
oh, 35, 36, something like that. No,
Yeah.
yeah, 36, 37. Yeah. Yeah. Something like that.
Second nodal return.
It was just, yeah, and it was just such a profound moment. And but actually when I started to study astrology was when Uranus traveled into Taurus and started to go over my sun,
Yeah.
and that sort of
I
accelerated.
know that transition well because my daughter was born with Uranus just having gone into Taurus. Yeah.
Well, anytime it goes over the sun, it just accelerates the learning, doesn't it? You,
Yes.
you can
Yes.
compress what should take 5 years into a much shorter time. So I was just like, I'm doing it now. And I'd never really felt able to do it before. And then suddenly I could really go for
So
it.
a therapeutic astrology transformed your life. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. I worked with an astrologer. He's got no
Yeah.
official therapeutic background, but
Yeah.
he's a brilliant therapist as well.
Yeah.
Just
Super helpful, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. Mm.
Well, good for you.
I wanted to ask you just a couple of hopefully light questions. Like
Yes.
who, just before we wrap up, who's your favorite astrologer?
I don't have a simple answer to that, I guess. Um, well, I mean, we've mentioned Dane Rudhyar
Mm.
was a massive influence. Maybe I can just say some influences. I mean, I studied with Jeffrey Green and Noel Till in my
Of course.
20s.
Hmm.
Green was a visionary, complex man, difficult teacher, but genuine visionary. Till taught me lots of the technical type stuff, even though I find his actual approach too narrow. But, in terms of transits and progressions and things like that and midpoints, he taught me enormous technical skills, which is super
Hmm.
handy. Liz Green is a massive influence. The psychological Green and Susportas, those psychology books. Stephen Arayo's
Oh, I love his
Astrology, Karma,
books.
Fate, and Transformation. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then Jung and Assagioli in that influence. I mean, I've just been in this mixing of these things for decades, to be honest. I'm percolating at this point, Jamie, with all that richness. And I don't find anything more interesting than that. I could admire individual works that people have done, but I don't find anything more gripping than the stuff we've been talking about and the names I just mentioned. Yeah.
And that might make this last question then a bit more difficult because I was going to ask you who's the therapist who's had the most influence on you, but has there been someone who's had a
Yeah.
profound influence?
You
Yeah.
mean as a thinker, or do you mean my individual therapist? I mean,
Or
I had two close relationships with individual therapists who were both very important and helpful and
Mhm.
incredible people and very different. And then, um, well, I mean, I can say something here because it might be useful to people. I mean, I think the work of Donald Kalshed, the Jungian analyst in Santa Fe, New Mexico, author of Archetypal Defense of the Spirit and Trauma and the Soul, is really highly valuable
Mhm.
contribution. they are life-changing books for the right person, even if you just skim read parts of it, for in particular Trauma in the Soul, because Trauma in the Soul includes chapters that are very elegant and concise summaries of what other therapists or therapeutic writers think about things. But even if you just got the gist of what Kalshed's saying about the complex relationship between trauma and your own self-protection systems, it's a breakthrough insight. So I have now, various key writers like that, key figures that help. But also I've gone beyond the world of just the traditional therapeutic mindset at this point, spiritual teachings, spiritual teachers, self-help. For a long time I was in the field between about 2007 and 2011. I was in the States a lot, and each time I would spend time in Arizona, in Sedona, with the David R. Hawkins community. I
You've
had
got all his
great
books, I
teachers.
noticed.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, yeah.
He's
Yeah, you can
astonishing,
tell they
man.
caught it. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it was an incredible act of integration, and I was fortunate to be there on his 80th birthday and just be a part of this field of even just imagining the integration between the greatest insights of Eastern spiritual thought and the Western philosophical tradition, and then
Mm.
practical psychological advice from this very funny old man. It's occasionally a bit crazy old man, but also hysterically funny. So that was hugely informative. I've had lots of different teachers and teachings exposed. I mean, I studied astrology first with Warren Kenton, the Kabbalistic astrologer.
Mm.
So I was influenced by Kabbalistic studies in my early mid 20s. I
Hmm.
was a member of the Theosophical Society before I studied psychosynthesis or even knew it was linked. I was
Wow.
I was in at the deep end from early on, right? And I was lucky enough to stumble across genuine high grade teachers. Otherwise, perhaps I wouldn't be so fortunate because,
Mhm.
frankly, it won't surprise you to know. I mean, I was in a band, occasionally we did inhale, that things were
Things
complicated.
happened.
Yes, some shit happened, right? And it's like, luckily, some shift happened too, because
Mm.
here I am. And that's not the case for everyone, but I was fortunate enough. I mean, William Bloom was a very early teacher in my early 20s. Was fantastically helpful, a man with a huge energy field, a huge presence. There was a different Kabbalistic teacher, a Greek Kabbalist who was teaching in the inner city of London that I was lucky enough to be turned on to his classes through the Theosophical Society.
Mhm.
And then there were the high quality therapists that trained me, uh, you know, Buddhist practices in my early 30s, Buddhist purification practices.
Any overlap with Kriya Yoga or by any chance?
No,
No. No.
but Green was all into that kind of
Mhm.
tradition. Yeah. Um, just been a wild ride, to be honest. And now my life is quite stable, very just sort of regular, sort of, I guess, middle class kind of British life on the outside. But, the vast majority of each day, I'm having conversations like this or helping people around the world using these different combined skill sets or teaching people it. And my response to COVID was to create a 2-year psychosynthesis spiritual psychology coaching training, primarily for astrologers, for non-therapists, for people who do not want to be a licensed therapist.
Mhm.
And I created over 100 hours of highly curated video content with beautiful slides, massive teachings on Freud, Jung. There's 6.5 hours on Jung alone and his vision and what the path is.
Mhm.
Maslow, Rogers, Assagioli, the psychosynthesis model, how to integrate the psychosynthesis model with different spiritual traditions.
That sounds great.
And I've got a
Really great.
researcher working with me now, content creator full time. So we've done huge projects. We have a chart database of like 1,200 charts or
Oh,
more.
wow.
So we can sort of run tests when we're looking at certain patterns historically. We've got a lot of stuff we can access to.
Mhm.
We're trying to go beyond that sort of limited. I did a few readings and then I looked at a few celebrities and I've decided this astrologically, and I'm going to tour the world for the next year telling you this based
Yeah.
on a very small glimpse. I'm not saying it's all wrong, and I'm certainly not knocking those people, but the idea that that's like a more
Mm.
substantive research, into a field that needs perhaps some grounding, a field that needs, because remember, as a fringe topic, it's developed outside of academia, which has perhaps been largely good for it. But academia does have some standards,
Indeed.
peer reviewed research kind of standards. And
Mm.
yeah,
I find it incredible where there is sort of like a niche little aspect, like an inconjunct or something
Yes,
that is held up as holding the secrets
I know.
to
I know.
marriage, your
Or
wealth,
the
and everything.
astrologers that make them up.
Yeah.
Yeah, Till made up the Quinta Chile. Yeah.
Oh, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, no, well, no one else does either.
Yeah.
I sat at his table once at a conference when the Quinta Chile cake was brought out in front of him. It's a 135-degree aspect.
All right. Okay.
So he just, if as if we needed another, he
Yeah.
came up with another. Uh, it's a tricky terrain. Just like the early days of therapy, astrology is still a bit rock and roll,
Mm.
right? That's incredibly exciting, and it's a touch dangerous and frankly full of shit.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot. There's a fair
it's
amount
a
of
mixed bag.
BS.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
have to. You realize you have to wade through a lot of BS before you get to the classical techniques that actually
yes,
work.
yes,
It's a bit like spirituality in the sense that you really do need to find somebody who can guide you at some stage,
exactly.
who can take you through the morass of nonsense to the stuff that actually cuts it.
Well, until you develop your own
And
internal
then,
radar, yeah.
yeah, you get it and you know what's going to be and what works. Yeah.
You could say astrology exists for you to, this is the way I would see it. It functions as a mirror to your own GPS, right? And after you've developed your own GPS, you might not look at the astrology that often. What commonly happens is there's an obsessional period with it. Then you might actually get somewhere, you could argue. Then you just start to live your life in a different way. That would be the healthy goal. You don't want to be
Mm.
looking at astrology all the time. I mean,
Mm.
that's the real trap for astrologers, isn't it? Every 5 seconds, oh, what a great conversation with Jamie. Oh my God, such and such was on such and such, break up the conversation. It's like you want to be in the flow of your life, don't you? I use astrology highly selectively, just for more significant things or to try and contemplate what I'm missing in a situation or what the extra thing could give me. And then
Mm.
most of the rest of the time, I'm only using it because frankly, people pay me to use it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just basically got to focus on, I think, on the big transits, the Uranuses when they're doing something very
Yes.
significant, or the Saturns and.
Well, that's the no-brainer place to start.
Mm.
I did a masterclass a couple of years ago in Wales called Turning Points, where we used that enormous chart database to analyze the significant moments that changed people's lives. Gandhi getting thrown off a train and deciding that apartheid was a bad thing and he was going to change, develop his non-violent resistance to such things. Or Rosa Parks on the bus, or just other kind of key turning points, spiritual breakthroughs, or, someone's sent to prison but then has a spiritual experience. Whatever we had on dates like that, we started looking at it and we created a map of the archetypal signature points you're talking about.
So fascinating.
And then other principles alongside it that you could look for, transiting outer planets to personal planets. The power of the transiting nodes was a huge surprise.
Oh yeah, we haven't even got to that today.
The
That was on my list.
moving nodes, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, so many things. Well, it's been a pleasure, sir. I mean, it's been really nice to meet you. You're
Mm.
a good company on a sort of mixed weather British morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, in late winter, early
Yeah.
spring.
Thank you so much for this conversation today. I've really enjoyed it. There is so much more, but I think just I have to draw a line and give you back
Yes,
to life. But
yes,
my final question is really just for you to say,
yes.
where do people, if they want to find you, or where do they go?
MarkJonesAstrology.com.
Okay.
Mark with a K,
Mark with a K.
JonesAstrology.com.
MarkJonesAstrology.com.
Yeah,
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much.
my pleasure.